Hey everyone, welcome to Software Sales Simplified, Move to Success, the podcast for software sales professionals who want to sell better. Whether you're a seasoned pro or just starting out, make Software Sales Simplified your go-to resource for actionable insights and real-world strategies. We focus not only on improving sales execution, but also dive into industry trends and technologies that are shaping the enterprise software space. So join us right here where you get your favorite podcasts, and we'll move to success together. I'm your host, Matt Long, joined with my esteemed colleague, Kevin Donville.
Good afternoon, everybody. Hope everyone's doing great. Good to see everybody here today.
And together we have about 50 years of enterprise software selling experience. In fact, we wrote a book that outlines our approach to sales called Winning Faster, the Move Framework for Enterprise Sales Success. And you can find a link to it in our podcast description. So today we're joined by Gary Williams. I've known Gary for probably about 15 years or so, I think, and I've had the pleasure of working with him in a lot of different capacities. I did support him as an SE on a couple of deals at some point, and then I've seen Gary, rise to the ranks, and he's now a leader of sales, and be VP of sales at Monetate. Is that correct?
That's correct, Matt.
Okay. Anyway, I will hand it over to you. How are you doing, Gary? And tell us a little bit about yourself.
I'm doing great, and what a privilege to be on with you, gentlemen. As you referenced, Matt, I've had the privilege over the years to work with both you and Kevin. Excited about jumping into some really important topics that I know you and Kevin have really dived into and are providing some great thought leadership and guidance on.
Well, thanks. We're really excited to have you on. I thought this podcast, we talk not only a little bit about your sales career and your approach and how you kind of got to where you are today, but I also wanted to dig in a little bit around the personalization space because it's a hot topic across the board, especially with the advent of AI, which seems to be the cure-all for everything, which, there's certainly benefits there, but we can dive into that as well. So I think it's going to be an interesting discussion today. First off, maybe you can just share a little bit about how you got into sales and, how that eventually led to a sales leadership role.
Sure. So it was an interesting journey and arc where right out of college, I was actually selling financial services products. So think of the traditional insurance products and investment products. And it was literally the boiler rooms of old where we would sit in the pit and our sales manager would throw leads at us. And it was a free-for-all to get the best leads of prospects and existing policyholders. So had done that for a while, and then actually worked for an insurance company at their home office for a few years. And then, interestingly, had some bit of fortune getting into the technology end of it. I was working for a financial services publisher in Indianapolis in the mid-90s. And at that time, guys, we were starting to web enable some of our materials. So the home office staff of insurance companies and brokerages, the production elements by way of the agents and the registered reps were wanting to do more of their training online, do more of their continuing education online. So we started bringing LMSs to the market. And so it was an exciting time. We were literally going from the paper to the desktop, and the technology aspect really just started to explode. So dealing predominantly, guys, in financial services, and then starting out as a seller. And then at a pretty young age, Matt, I was elevated into a leadership role. Probably 28 years old was when I had my first opportunity. And at a team based in Indianapolis, I had 8 sellers. And at the time, there was no remote. So it was that traditional, we were in office when we were in front of our customers and prospects and doing the 4 weeks of travel, 1 week in the office, and started out like that 20 plus years ago. And then from a technology perspective, really stayed predominantly in a leadership capacity throughout the years in evolving technologies. Financial services is a focus, but then branching out into other verticals and then other technologies that were both process oriented, but eventually became revenue generating in orientation.
I'm just curious, at 28, what was either the quality that you had or the circumstances that kind of led you to assume a leadership role or one to be given to you, I guess? Do you think back to that time that there was something that you were doing or some quality that you had that really helped with that transition?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think what served me well was building out processes and
Mm.
playbooks, for lack of a better term, on how to go about effectively prospecting, navigating sales cycles, and scaling my business that I was able to impart to some of my colleagues at the time. And as a result, I caught the eye of a few of our senior leaders, and when presented the opportunity, they took the flyer, right? I had no classical leadership experience
Hmm.
before that, had taken a few of the requisite courses, but it was opportunistic.
Hmm.
And again, it's a little cliche, but putting myself in that right position early in life allowed me to start my learning journey, guys, where again, I had just the right amount of knowledge at the time on how to build and scale a sales team and used some of those principles and foundations throughout the rest of my leadership career.
Yeah, I think it's a quality that you share with Kevin and I, which I call it the lazy man's approach, where it's like, I don't want to have to do something twice and make it up twice. If I could figure out a way to figure it out, document it, and then just replicate that over and over, that's what I'm trying to do, right? Even though it's a little extra work, it saves me so much in the long term. It sounds like that's a quality that we share because, trying to understand process is a really good skill to have because there's so much noise. There's so many things going on. So being able to distill it down into some key steps that you can then train other people to do, I think is a really important skill. So kudos on that.
It also lowers the volume of the noise and distraction, right? Where
Mm-hmm.
guys, it's not a draconian approach where stay within the box or you're at peril, but rather again just a guidebook and the ability to have processes infused. So again, I allow for artistic license. I want people to really shine and salespeople to be able to really broaden themselves in their careers, in their own arcs. But at its foundation, Kevin and Matt, I think that's a really important piece of it.
So it's interesting. Matt and I are very big on process, Matt, even more so than I am. And I know from firsthand how much you're dedicated to that in your professional career. If you're going to put your finger on the early lesson that led to future success, was it that awareness, that epiphany, that process was so important to your success? Is that the kind of like the big lesson you learned back then that still applies today? Or is there something else that came along that you were like, no, 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 this is actually the thing that's going to carry me forward and make me successful?
Process was the foundation, guys. And that process, to be very fair and clear, has evolved, has improved, has met the needs of the time. And far and away, Kevin, it's been a foundation and a guiding principle. I think the other thing that a mentor shared with me as a young leader was a saying where he said, push through the friendly. And I thought about that, guys, and I thought, why would somebody disrupt something as positive and comforting as something friendly and familiar? And his counsel to me was, in life, and in particularly in sales or sales leadership, people are going to want to say good things back to you. They're going to want to give you positive impressions because that's an easy human nature thing to do. And he said to me, guys, push through that and be sure that once you're past the friendly, that you are clearly aligned to whatever solution you have, Gary, to meet their needs and requirements, whether it be financial services LMS, whether it be systems of record, whether it be personalization solutions. And that stuck with me because it added just the right element of cynicism and dare I say paranoia on challenging and making sure that in our shared profession, gentlemen, we are not just prancing about and not being as focused and discerning as we need to be. So back to your leading, Kevin, it's a process where it's complemented by this rigorous inspection and this
Mm,
rigorous validation that I didn't have as a disciplined approach in my
mm,
years prior. So call it 23 to 26 ish. But when I assumed that leadership responsibility and position, I didn't have a choice other than to
mm.
be predictable and delivering at that time.
Yeah, I think we've all experienced what do they call it, happy years or whatever, And part of our job, I always felt, Kevin, was to kind of put some reality check on what's going on with this deal.
Got to pop that
And
balloon, pop the balloon. Yeah.
that's right. And whether it's devil's advocate or whatever, or worst case, but like let's really examine that. So I love that push to the friendly because yeah, I mean, we all want to be liked. We all want to have a positive meeting and things like that. But how many meetings have we left? It's like, this is great. And then nothing happens. Right. So I
Yeah,
love
no,
that.
100%, guys. And in fact, there's also an interesting dynamic where as you're going through that process, there's something I've coined as validation fatigue from our
Mm,
prospects and customers, right? Where we have asked a validation question or a verification question so many times and by so many other stakeholders that you can start to sense a bit that you've gotten to that wall and there needs to be a little bit of a backup. And I like when we get there, right? Because
mm,
then you feel you truly and honestly feel that you've put your hands around a particular approach or solution or opportunity in such a way now that hey, business happens, there could be some sort of competing priority or a change in approach, but that validation fatigue needs to be pushed to that end of the envelope.
mm.
And that way again, you push through the friendly, you get the validation fatigue close to that line and then we know that we're in the right place and time to move forward with all pieces and parts of a process.
So when you hit that validation fatigue, then what is the next step, I guess, in the process for you?
Yeah, then we start to put all of the bits and bytes together as far as a deployment motion, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we have to be really keen on sequencing here because there's a lot of jumping the shark and getting
Mm,
ahead of ourselves, right? And as we're in a process, when my teams are in their processes and they've gotten to that fatigue endpoint, once we clear that, again, the logical disposition, guys, is let's uncork the champagne and start to celebrate. And there again, that's where we have to be cautious and mindful and thinking in terms of, okay, so now we're past that gate. Again, not time to celebrate, but let's get into the granularity and the minutia of getting things set up to deliver and start to talk about the gates and timelines, guys, where there's going to be not this philosophical or whimsical value that people are going to start deriving, but literal points in time when goodness is going to be there.
mm.
And we start to tip the scale into that customer advocacy and them being even more a part of our team and more ambassadors of what we're currently trying to partner with them on.
I'm a big proponent of what you're talking about there about making that a partnership with the customer as you're going forward because it's their success is our success and vice versa. So I understand the symbiotic relationship there. I also know that different different industries, different verticals can have very nuanced changes in the way that you have to engage that with the stakeholders because there's very different cultures that are at play there. Obviously, now you're in the personalization testing area, and that's very different than where you started out with LMS, financial services, and where you and I used to work together in customer experience. So, tell us a little bit about what is the nature of that culture. What is value in personalization to the audiences you're talking to, and is there a difference in how you have to approach that with the people you're selling to now versus the way you used to do it in the past?
Yeah, that's a great question, Kevin, because invariably it is all going to be based on what a solution or what a vertical target defines in their own words as what is important to them and what they really give a rip about. And so back in my early days, it was compliance and onboarding and efficiency, turning its table completely at this point. Now my remit with Monetate is revenue generation. And so the story has changed, and the market is one where for me in my current space, which is an amazingly exciting space, it is all about attribution of revenue, leveraging all the technologies, certainly everything AI oriented. And now the conversations, irrespective of vertical. So I could be talking to an airline, I could be talking to a bank, or I could be talking to the largest retailer in the world. And ultimately, gentlemen, it is about personalization, not having this vague, cloudy definition that you'll get 18 different narratives on, but rather, okay, what is the specific lift you believe you can achieve with a technology that can de-anonymize one of your customers and put them in the best position to buy as much as reasonably possible, and do that with a mechanism of testing on the back end. And so it's interesting because in my journey, I've had different solutions that have the two ends of the spectrum. There's the expense takeout, and then there's the growth. But what's interesting is I found that most sales organizations don't take the time to really unpeel that and get as intimate as they really need to, in the sense that, hey, information now is so readily accessible, right? As great as it's ever been, and it's going to get better. And our organizations, our sales groups, making sure that they can understand preemptively what's important. Again, the two ends of the spectrum, and then have the means to which they can navigate an organization with good process and good foundations of things like discovery and how to appropriately navigate a complex org, so that they can truly understand what those important things are, guys, and then act on them. Because as you both know intimately, that is such a gap at the moment, and so opportunistic on the positive side for what organizations can aspire to achieve.
What would you say for our listeners out there are the differences between personalization and just segmentation? Because both of those kind of apply, but I think they're used interchangeably. Is there a difference that you can articulate between the two?
Yeah, segmentation in our view is really a subset, Matt, of a personalization strategy and a personalization go-to-market act. And so that's a piece of the puzzle where a personalization engine, an organization, let's say, is going to segment their users. And they can do this in myriad ways, right? They could do it by gender, by geo, by income, by all of these data points. And that's a part of it where personalization really takes off, is factoring in everything that can be done by way of segment, and then taking as much intra-session data and prior profile data that has some segmentation to it, but things from a CDP, data from a CRM, any data that a customer has opted in and provided, enriches and grows that ability for organizations in their personalization strategies to take full and every advantage of presenting an offer to Matt Long that is wildly different than Kevin Donville, not because of a browser type and not just because of a different geo, but because of learnings. And again, those learnings are pre-journey, or those can get combined and fed in and activated into intra-journey. And so it's a very powerful thing for organizations to smartly roll these things out, but it also requires some planning, it requires some discipline, and it requires organizations that understand they don't have to be the greatest in the world. They don't have to jump to stage 8 or 9 in their maturity. But like with all technologies, gentlemen, you can start small, you can take a little bite and have some needle lift that has some very positive effect for your organization.
Yeah, if I can draw a parallel just with, let's say, the sales process, right? We would segment, obviously a retailer is different from financial services, different than tech. I mean, those obviously are different plays, different value points, et cetera. But then each one of those accounts, of course, is different as you meet the people, as you apply these techniques. That's kind of where the personalization comes in a little bit. When you're coming back with the insights that you get from all this data and then the segment they're in, what to do you think that this is where AI can really play, or where does that kind of fit? I mean, how good is it at kind of coming up with some insights or some plays to do for this particular individual or set of individuals?
Yeah, so great question, Matt. So traditionally, our merchandiser friends have had to do all of this manually, right? And they would read the data and they would say, okay, based on this persona of a Matt versus a Kevin versus a Gary, we would set up these recommendations, let's say, based on this male at this age demographic, based on this geo, based on a prior propensity. And that would be a manually intensive endeavor that the merchandisers, the people in a product group in an organization would have to do. So prior to AI, there's been technologies in play leveraged by organizations like Monetate that have successfully automated that. And over the past 3 to 5 years at organizations like mine, we have built that into the underpinning of all of our personalization journey. So we define personalization, gentlemen, as everything starting from the A/B testing and experimentation of a website. So really where things get started when you're doing all the traditional things, you can now do things dynamically by way of AI treatment, all the way through recommendations, and then ending with things like product discovery and search. So in all areas of that, right? And even focusing on search as the last pillar. When you're looking at things like relevancy, and as you're going to a website, guys, and you type in a search term and you get something that doesn't quite align to what you typed into, the AI treatment, the natural language models, the natural language processes, and the LLMs, all of that coupled with AI treatment and AI attacking of the data is making the organizations not just faster, but much smarter and allowing them to iterate and change course at speeds that they've never seen in their past.
So you're bringing up some interesting and intriguing ideas here. The way that AI is sort of supercharging the way that things have been done in the past. But the mechanisms you're talking about, there's a lot of moving parts there, which maybe some of the folks that are listening to this call aren't always familiar with. But there's a lot of different and potentially elegant systems all coming together. There must be in the industry, and I know based on some of the readings I've had, with the concerns right now with privacy and things of that nature, and now that you're bringing AI into the equation, are there greater concerns now about how do we maintain and preserve security and privacy now that we're taking this additional step of bringing AI into the mix? And if so, how are you guys addressing those with both your customers and your customers' customers?
So very, very critical topic, right? The whole idea of information, making something personally identifiable, having individuals tracked by way of cookies, whatever mechanisms can be. And then, yes, Kevin, you throw in this daunting artificial intelligence element. What will that mean to people's privacy and the sensitivity or the anonymization that there are customers that truly want to have as part of their journey? And so we've continued to see a bifurcation of the anonymized versus the opted in. And interestingly, we have the means, the industry has the means to separate those constituencies and apply the artificial intelligence in those unique personas, not to cross the lanes and not to have people that have opted out and by way of AI treatment, Kevin, then somehow unlock some of that personalized data. And so we've not seen any cross streaming at this point. There's still globalization considerations where, again, North America is treated differently than Europe, that's treated differently than Asia Pacific. And so the technology concerns are required to have their solutions operate in those jurisdictions. And so what we're seeing at this point is swim lanes for artificial intelligence that, again, start at that geo basis and then stay within those two primary segments of anonymized versus non, and then leveraging every efficiency and more so, guys, every opportunity that artificial intelligence can feed us. Again, a great example in a personalization world is where a marketer or merchandiser may have thought these particular items complete a look, complete a household decor, or complete a shirt and pant combo. Well, that's all gone into the fast lane, and there's new opportunities that are being presented and then being scored and determined, is that a good opportunity to continue to offer to a particular segment, or do we put that one down, bury it a bit because we're not seeing the results? And so the speed to which organizations can now get at that data and then act on it is extraordinary.
I think one of the trends I've seen over the years, both in the selling motion as well as just with the customers in terms of the retail and consumer space, is that it's a lot easier to retain customers and grow them than to get new ones, right? I know that there's some differences in terms of the data that you could use when you have a relationship with someone as opposed to not. How does that kind of affect the focus? Is that a big focus for companies now where they're actually trying to leverage all the information they have to create better experiences, to retain customers? Because that's always what I want, but it's not always what I get when I have a relationship. So what have you seen there?
Yeah, it is so significant. You look at, CAC, the cost for acquiring customers versus what we hear typically is closet share. If organization A has a customer that has 3 pieces of clothing in their closet, well, they want 6. How do they go about doing that? And you could not believe how strategic that is for, I would dare say, most organizations that we have the pleasure of having discussions with. And so important. And here again, then you start to get into the balancing of that customer that has opted in and they're on their journey with you. And where is that sweet spot of providing recommendations, giving them offers, giving them incentives versus that customer just wanting to check out and go about their day? And so from an excitement perspective, from an opportunity perspective, we see things like that. And again, going back to artificial intelligence, trying to understand where is that tuned optimally. So we know where those thresholds are. We know where that LTV of a customer may really reside and push the envelope so dollars aren't being left on the table, but we're not having somebody crash out, go to a competitor and start blasting on social media that said, hey, all I wanted to do was buy a pair of sneakers, but they just kept pushing and pushing and pushing until I had to say no to the sweater and the cap and the t-shirt.
Yeah, I mean, one trend I heard of, or one prediction I heard of a while ago, maybe it was 10 years ago, was like, we're going to go from, just a couple different personalizations or segments into a one-to-one marketing where it's going to be so personalized down to an individual and it's going to scale tremendously. That kind of went away as people start realizing they just can't even do the basic stuff first. But now I'm hearing it again with AI. The promise of AI is that it's going to be so intelligent. It's going to, again, go down to this one-to-one personalized experience that's unique to every individual. What do you see with that? And also where do you see this whole thing going in terms of personalization? What kind of trend or what would you see down the road in about, a few years?
So it's the flying car analogy, Matt.
Mm.
Right? I mean, of course, is technology there to let cars fly? Probably, not very safely, but sure. Is technology there to have the absolute keenest one-to-one for every single person? Sort of, kind of. But practically, I look at the industry and the markers as what is the incremental value that vendor solution partners can sign up for. And organizations, our customers, put into their strategies and into their metrics that they hold themselves accountable for that are reasonable and are reasonable enough for them to make investments. So the great news, the absolute phenomenal news is it is improving and it's getting smarter because as traditional AI grows, it learns. And so it will start ditching the negatives and the failures and focusing and really propagating the successes more. And so it is ever evolving. It's a space too that you talked about lots of technologies just in MarTech as an example, right? We all worked in experience analytics. And there's another interesting dynamic where organizations are starting to really focus in on integrations with their tech. And I've spoken to a number of leaders at organizations. I attend conferences. And this is going to be the other sea change where when organizations look at personalization platforms as an example, guys, they're going to be requiring, not the nice to have, but requiring that you don't live in a silo. You open up the APIs and you ingest and export data so they can be more efficient. They can start to normalize their tech stack a little bit. They're still going to have lots of different solutions, and all of them are going to talk about ROI. They're going to have that problem for a bit, but they're really looking at that exciting storyboard of, okay, Kevin and Matt are kicking the tires and they're doing an ad search. Let's take them in and let's have them check out. Oh, and by the way, let's feed this system and let's ingest data from that system. And so I know we're going to be seeing more and more of that near term. And that's going to be so incredible for the big players in the space and then for the consumers too.
There's so much going on in this space right now. Just hearing you talk about it, we could probably take an hour just peeling back all the different inputs, and some of them 3 years ago didn't even exist. They weren't even a consideration. As a sales leader, how are you keeping your team focused on the things that matter? Because that's a lot of noise to try and manage sales focus through. What are some of the things you're doing to make sure that your team isn't getting lost in that minutia?
Scream a lot, so I got their attention.
Good, great tactic. We know a lot of people have been very successful with that in their careers.
Meetings are involved.
Yeah. So, no, guys, it is difficult, right? Because again, going back to the definition of personalization as a start, there's different interpretations and then different value alignments. So where I focus my team is very succinctly on what we start as an understanding of potential alignment and value, and then focus so significantly on good foundational discovery and making sure that they're doing that in a collaborative environment where they're just not doing that on their own. They're bringing in, great partners from our pre-sales organization, from our strategy group. So again, the focus is still on the alignment, but they can do so in a collaborative construct. And as we navigate through a cycle with a new prospect, as an example, we can be sure that, yes, their focus is following sales process that I've delivered and checkpoints and ways to be sure that we're still on topic, but we can also make the course corrections where needed. And again, have that foundation of process, gentlemen, but not be afraid, based on what we've heard, to make any modifications along the way. And here again, in the world of discovery, getting past the superficial, getting past just, the high level questions about talk to me about your goals, talk to me about what's really important to you. Having that next layer down, and to be clear and fair, that's not the first call. That may not even be the second call, right? We've lived those deals in the past, guys. We've had the pleasure of doing those together. We understand the commitment that's needed by a high performing sales team to take things to those next levels, really dig in, and it's almost an imbalanced cycle where there's more work done then. Yes, we're going to show them everything on the back end. We're going to show them the amazing things under the hood. But if we've validated that we can ask those right types of questions and suss out the information that's going to put us in a position to say, gosh, this is great, or hey, right now, let's probably not keep going forward because it's really disconnected. And we don't want to have you thrashing in where you're at with where we're at. Perfectly fair and I think perfectly appropriate, guy.
Interesting. So, I mean, that discovery is so important to Matt and I. It's one of the principles that we wrote our methodology on, and one of the kind of foundational aspects of the book that we just published. What are some of the tactics that you're using to try and make sure? How do you ensure that your team is doing good discovery when they're going out there?
Yeah, no, that's a really good question because again, I think there's so many scripts, right? There's so many, hey, if somebody says this, you have this as a rebuttal. If you're asked this or you ask this, then follow up with these next three questions. I think there's a couple ways to skin this. I think there's the foundational knowledge and enabling that has to be done first and foremost, right? You have to understand the space, you have to understand the personas and get familiar enough. And then the next stage I really call immersion, right? Where they will typically partner with more senior people, ideally some SMEs from a particular industry or a SME on a particular persona title, and really just listen, Kevin, right? Listen to how questions land. And again, I think a key learning here is when you ask that question to see the body language, to see the facial response, because people, again, for the most part, will be hospitable and they will answer questions, but understanding the key to how much they are really going to not just divulge, but give you and share nuances is the hard part, guys. And so in strategic software selling, it's not instant pudding and it doesn't happen overnight. It is a journey that my teams go through. And again, the students of discovery take the time to do a lot of basic things like role play. And I refer to it as getting their noses bloodied, where if we're going into a new market or it's somebody that I've had the pleasure of promoting up from, maybe an inside sales role and they've not done as much deep discovery, then they're going to listen to people like me do it. And guys, I don't have all the answers. I just have a lot of years. And so I've had a lot of the experiences and the curveballs thrown at me that I can impart some ways of good navigation and then good ways of keeping things like discovery on the rails that lead to potential solutioning, again, depending on what we hear.
Yeah, one way I like to think of it is I don't have all the answers, but I have a lot of questions.
That's right. Exactly right.
I mean, to that end, as a sales leader, I mean, other than obviously creating, consistent, reproducible, and predictable revenue, right? Number one. But, if you're able to, instill something into your sales team, what would be the one or two things that you would absolutely try to do, realizing that you can't do everything? But what would be those types of things that you would really feel you succeeded if you're able to get your team to follow these things?
Yeah, I think the big thing, Matt, is for them to understand that, again, with a complex technology solution, they're not out on an island. This isn't them carrying the weight of the world. That they do have a team of teams around them, and be quick to activate those teams, not irrational, but quick to activate those teams. And what I've seen is just by way of going into a relationship with a team and having people not just show up to be in a Zoom room or a Teams room or physically in a location, but to have a part and a role and a success component is really critical. And where I see that happen, I see us win more times than not. Where I see a little bit of cowboyitis and resistance to that, more losses than anything.
Yeah, I think that's one thing we both really enjoyed about working with you and why we got along so well is because we're all integral parts of this team that are going forward. And we all have our roles, our knowledge, our approach, our observations, and all those are critical, right? And when you're dealing with such a long sales cycle, so many different players, the more eyeballs you have, the more relationships you have, the better. So I think that's really great advice there and things to remember. I mean, we could continue talking for a long time, but I do want to kind of wrap it up here. It's always a pleasure talking with you, Gary. I just love your energy and your just positive nature and also very matter-of-fact way that we can communicate. So thanks so much for being on. If people wanted to reach out to you just to contact you about, just a follow-up for things or other questions they might have, what would be the best way for them to do that?
I would say through LinkedIn, right?
Mm-hmm.
My profile is there. So connect with me on LinkedIn. I would love to hear from you. I would love to answer any questions that you have and help out in any way.
All right. Well, we'll put a link, as we always do, to your profile in the podcast description. So we have access to that. And there'll be a lot of other goodies in there too. So make sure you check that out after listening to our podcast. But anyway, I wanted to thank everyone for joining us this week. It's really interesting to talk about different technologies and different approaches. So I really appreciate you diving into a little bit about where you are now in terms of what you're selling and how you're kind of understanding the market's reception for that. Because I think that's always a challenge with every technology, is not only understanding it, but then how do I articulate and message this appropriately? So thanks for that, Gary. For everyone else, thanks again for listening to Software Sales Simplified, Move to Success. Make sure if you like this that you do like and subscribe or comment or just give us suggestions as to future podcasts and subjects that you would like us to cover. We have a lot of great guests lined up, but we always love to hear from you in terms of things that you think would be valuable for your growth and journey as a seller. So with that, Kevin, any last words?
No, just wanted to say thank you, Gary, for coming on board. I was not a Hoosier myself, but you managed to convert me, which was important because my daughter went there, and it was important for me to be able to root on Indiana, which has had a great year, by the way. It was a great year watching them play. So thank you so much for coming on to the call.
My pleasure, guys. Thank you for having me.
All right. Until next week.
Take care, everybody.